This is the Take Your Turn 2022 tournament hosted by Groove of War. Groove of War hosts Wargroove commentary and analysis, and there's a link to their channel in the description. Take Your Turn is composed of 3 events: Wargroove, Chess, and Go. And of course, as you can see on this channel, we'll be looking primarily at Go. My name is Arn Fosta, and as you might have guessed again, I'll be your Go commentator. This commentary is aimed at newer players and players in the double-digit Q ranks. If you do spot any mistakes or things I've missed, please leave them in the comments, let me know. I'm always learning alongside everybody else. Today, we're going to be looking at Round 1, Game 1, a match between Newbie 101, also known as Ruler, and playing black, and Xmo5 or Xmo playing white. Let's jump in. So the big things that stand out to me are in the very beginning, and it's already at move 8, and then shortly after that I think we'll probably spend a lot of time talking about. I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with a play at R5 by Xmo, but I do want to talk about it a little bit because I think it sort of encapsulates a little bit of what we'll be talking about and seeing later on in the game. So this move here at R5 by Xmo, just to kind of get the corner, put a little more strength in the corner here. There's 2 things about it that I think are worth considering. Oops. The first thing is that it absolutely strengthens the corner, makes it easier for white to take this bottom right corner now that there are 3 stones there. But we are only 8 moves in the game, which means that much of the board is undecided. There is a lot of space and room to play to set down stones and begin to mark out influence that you can utilize later. So to start and to make this such a hard play in the right hand corner, I think feels like it's looking maybe a bit too local in the start. So it does push black back, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But by pushing black back, if we go just a move or 2, the result is that we have an even heavier concentration by the time this resolves. 4 moves only in the bottom right, and because of what we did, pushing back and directly attacking the R6 stone that Newbie 101, that Ruler played, we're also encouraging black to further strengthen their position. And you can see the difference here between, say, the right-hand side where there's this 2-point jump and the bottom corner where there's a knight's move. There's the positioning in my mind looks a little bit stronger, a little bit more promising for black, for Ruler. It's more open, but it feels like it's doing a better job at the moment of being able to establish an opening space with which to work with, whereas right here we're kind of only stuck in the corner, and there absolutely is this D4 stone on the other side, but there's nothing in between to help us get there. There's no, if we look at an alternative, there's no move around a K3 or a J3 even higher, potentially with how many stones you have. At a K or a J or an H4, there's nothing there to really give us at least a strong influence on the side. We're very much regulated to a smaller portion. So I think that instead, something worth considering here would be a move, rather than actually put down a move. Let me just give some alternatives. So where else might we look instead? We have a whole left-hand side that's open. We could try and push up to really establish ourselves on that left-hand side in a way that we're only in the corner right now. We could also push into the center. I'm not sure it does as much for us. It gives us a lot of influence, and so could be good there, but doesn't give us necessarily a foundation to work from. You could come down and at least come into the center, where you're trying to capture the whole bottom center instead of just the corner. That's a possibility, though it also feels a little bit small compared to how black has one corner in the top left, one corner in the top right, and is trying to establish the right-hand side as well. So the other moves I'd consider are attacks in the top 2 corners. to destabilize black or try to take the corners away from black and begin to get yourself set up in that territory. So if we're looking, it's just, a couple ideas like this: A, B, the 3-3 point to attack those before black can build up. A move like C on C14 here in order to approach, and then perhaps to fall back. You would try to approach and then pull back to utilize your D4 stone. Those moves would get you further out on the board, and you can absolutely come back and defend later in the bottom right. But if you lose or have to fight for that corner, but you've already got another corner taken in response, or you've got the whole left side better strengthened, I think those things may be a little bit more beneficial in the long run. Let's go ahead and keep watching. And it's here that I also want to spend a few minutes talking, because I think the early game is so critical to the ways in which the rest of this game plays out. There's two components of it. The first being the setup. So the setup of this game is that black begins by having pretty strong influence across half the board, plus already being pushed a little bit into the lower right. Whereas if we look at white's position, instead white has the lower fifth, and then the lower left-hand corner is where all of the stones are. There's no stone elsewhere on the board, no presence at all for white, and it means that white has to fight a very uphill battle. It means that if the battle lines and the walls were to be drawn right now, black would certainly lose and be in a very bad position. As such, from this position, I think white should be thinking, I need to be aggressive. I need to be aggressive, because if we simply let things progress as they are, if these current, I was about to say territories, but that would be the wrong word. The current walls that the black is trying to form and that white is trying to form, it will simply be a losing result, and as such, we need to do something big, likely meaning we want to look again to those corners where we might be able to utilize the fact that it's a corner, the 3-3 point and otherwise, to try to begin to carve out points inside of black's territory, giving us a little bit more breathing room from which to build our own. So this is the second point that I think makes a lot of sense to me, and I wanted to talk about because I think in this way, from this standpoint in the game, it ends up not working out. So Xmo as white plays at F9 here. This is move 17, and then newbie 101 or ruler, as black responds with the F10 play. One of the things we're going to see throughout this game that I'll point out a couple of times is just, I think there's a tendency or an understandable desire to push in to new spaces from existing support, right? So this move here, this knight's move at F9, comes from the backing of this D8 stone, right? So if we look at that, we'll switch and make those squares. So if we look at these, the two stones that are marked squares, white is now trying to find a way into black's territory, but is doing so from an existing space of relative safety. And I think this is where a lot of the troubles that Xmo is going to be having come from, in addition to the initial setup. It's that after the initial setup, and we recognize we're in trouble, the way in which Xmo ends up pushing forward is a bit too safe, because as you can see, Xmo pushes forward with a knight's move, and newbie 101 or ruler just says, hey, I can play at F10 to push back and stop you from an easy intrusion. But in so doing, these two battle lines that were drawn are simply getting reinforced, and there isn't an actual divide that's really happening. There's no split inside yet that's occurring, which is why I think that before stones continue to get placed earlier in the game, being able to try and intrude then, being able to try and invade and start new groups away from existing groups, right? So if we didn't do this knight's move, what else might we be looking for? I think we'd be looking for, you know, we mentioned before, you have your two, this would be more for a move. We'll go ahead and do an ABC situation here. You've got your 3 points. I think that there's still maybe something here with C14, though I'd want to read it out a little bit more. Obviously, the setups right now are basically the same, so you could also play at R14. Honestly, in theory, I'd be curious about something more directly in the center of these two spaces, meaning in the 12 to 14 line. Something further up, further away, not necessarily able to utilize the comfort of existing stones, of your D8 stone, but because of that, way more aggressive, way in a stronger position to destabilize black and prevent them from simply easily reinforcing their position. I still think the fact that you've got these 4 stones already in place, if we look at the left side, means that any incursion you make is going to be difficult. But approaching it from the front, essentially, ends up allowing black to further reinforce and makes it super difficult for you to jump in. Another thing, too, is if we look at this, if we look at move 20 here with E9, I think this is a very valid play, and I think what Xmo recognizes is that it's useful to strengthen this group because they're a weak group right now. They don't have many stones. I think in contrast, it may be a little bit slow because the clock is against Xmo. Because right now, black is in such a favorable position in my mind. It is a safe play that Xmo is doing. And if it were a different situation where Xmo had the advantage and influence, I think it would be perfect. Except that because Xmo's in the reverse situation and behind, a more promising or a move that would be more impactful, I think might simply be heading straight in. You've got a moment in which black pulls back and black simply solidifies with the E10 play. Use that moment to dive in. Your goal then is, you know, you could just do a 1 jump. I might even try and do a 2-point jump to really dive in and create chaos. You are working with a weaker group. You are leaving yourself more vulnerable, and you are opening yourself up to some issues here, absolutely, in this space. But if instead we simply progress more conservatively and we pull back to strengthen that group first, we give Newbie 101 and Ruler, we give them Sente, we give them the initiative, and it also changes for us so that we aren't able to take advantage we're not able to take advantage of Gote, and black is beginning to strengthen this space without us really gaining much yet. And I think those things are kind of give us pause. We can even see here by move 27 that we've got Ruler and black jumping in that 3-3 corner, trying to take away the corner. And I think that's something that Xmo, if they had been able to recognize on the opposite end, could have been really useful and really helpful in this situation. So we have that play out. There's a move here, I think. So it makes sense that you kind of want to jump ahead. You want to utilize your L4 stone. I think Xmo does a nice job of trying to utilize those stones. I think instead of just trying to stop black, you see black's momentum is headed to the right, so you try to cut it off with a K2 play. And while that makes sense, I think that it might have been more profitable to go ahead and first push down to threaten to cut off, because let's say if we look at that, let's say that black ignores that. We can always, if we wanted to, simply play at h1 and fully separate the stones. And now, sure, black has an extra stone here, but you've got a heavy concentration on this right side that looks against a side that looks really good for you. So I don't think that black would be likely to let that pass, in which case, if it's more likely I think black is going to try and keep it together, in which case you can still play your original play at k2. Now though, you have a stone in h3 that has a buddy at h2 that is a stronger group, and you have more ways in which to separate or pressure black that I think could be useful. So I think this would allow you to do a similar thing to allow you to still do what Xmo wanted to do, because it makes sense. You want to try and lock down black and prevent them, but that extra sequencing of first pushing down to threaten to separate, or really to separate, ends up giving you more leverage later on. So if instead we look at what happens, Xmo does stop and black goes to push up. Xmo wants to, I think there's some considerations here. I think it does make sense to play at k3 in that it does create this nice wall. But I do wonder about potentially trying to either cap this or even so other things I would consider. Plays like this, you can currently pull back with your k2 stone if that's what you're concerned about. So I think that there may be that it's not in immediate danger. You still have a move to respond, and instead trying to keep black contained and prevent them from pushing out might have been a better call, but I'm not certain on that. I think the result though is that in the current situation, Ruler is able to take advantage of the fact that we have this weaker h3 stone off on its own. So first black pushes up, then black turns, threatening to take that stone, in which case Xmo understandably goes ahead and solidifies, which gives Ruler as black the opportunity to simply push up again. One small thing here, I think there are times in which, again, when you're focused on trying to take a group, there are times this can make a lot of sense here, this h6 play, in trying to very heavily clamp down, be the most aggressive impossible and taking liberties. That mindset makes sense. If we look at the context, it may be worth an alternative may be worth considering. So if our mindset is still to go ahead and take, I think that reinforces the power of an earlier h2 play to split and keep that leverage, prevent an easy joining. The other thing too, though, is yes, we've reduced black's liberties by one again, but we've also opened ourselves up to a cutting point. And given the concentration of the stones we have, a real consideration would have been simply coming back. So instead of continuing to press at h6, we instead simply pull back to j6. We still are able to utilize this entire concentration of stones we have. We haven't lost that. We've still made it unbelievably difficult for black to sit here and make life, not counting at the bottom here, which is important. But at least in theory, we have put on that pressure that this space is not going to be one in which black can make life easily. But we've eliminated black's ability to easily counter pressure us with a cutting point. So pulling back there, I think, may have given Xmo the same ability to hold that pressure and keep that pressure on black without allowing black to turn it around. So as you can see here, that's what black does. Black eventually comes through, utilizes this cutting point in order to try to turn things around. So we have this battle breaking out. This is another moment here where I think it's a really common mindset, and one I saw throughout round one. It makes perfect sense of how do I attack, how do I move forward in the game. I should move forward. The mindset of I should move forward from my existing stones. I should take the base that I've got, and I've been building it for a reason. Let me make use of it. And there are times in which I think that absolutely makes sense, but it can be, or it tends to be, as we see here, a little bit slower because you're working from. It's more stable, it's safer, but it's slower because you're having to build out from where you already are. So this move at M9 is a way of trying to pressure black and push into this territory, but I think that like with the moves on this left-hand side, it doesn't quite go far enough and really encourages black to more directly simply reinforce the battle lines they drew 14 moves into the game. And in this case, we have Ruler, I think, doing a nice job of utilizing this L7 stone to, utilizing the L7 stone as an excuse to then turn, knowing that white is going to take, and just further extend the territory that they're pushing. So the issue we're looking at right now is that we wanted to keep our stones together and to utilize our existing group, but we were able to get it turned around on us, and now we're further separated. So the question obviously is, with these stones kind of by themselves, what can we do? And I think Xmo's doing a nice job looking for some way in. And there is, just because the influence of these 4 stones, we've got the line here, the situation is against Xmo. Xmo is going to have to do more work to find something, pull a rabbit out of their hat in order to be able to take these stones. But I think Xmo is doing a nice job trying to look for that and figure out a way in which to make life or capture stones through a complex battle in the center here. One thing is I think this O11 play is smart. It's you need to jump out, you need to get out, you need to give yourself more opportunities to stay alive here. But I think that it might have been, so rather than the 1-point jump, I think the 2-point jump may have been a little bit more profitable in this case, in that we'll see in a second, but with the 1-point jump, it's easier for black to sort of stay ahead of you. The 2-point jump is riskier, but when your goal here is to get out and stay alive, there's enough space that the reading for me gets difficult enough for the possibilities that I think you might want to play a little bit looser, because you really need to get yourself liberties quickly. And so again, I think it is maybe also in this game about where can I take more risk from the position of white? Where can I play a little looser? Where can I be a little greedier, because I need that greed just to get me on par and to fight back against the initial setup, because I'm in this space where black has all the advantages. So if we look at how the game progresses from that 1-point jump, we can see that with P12, black is able to get ahead, keep the pressure on, and then importantly also reinforce his right-hand side. And in this case, I think white is doing a nice job of trying to see where they might be able to, doing their best to read and see if they can capture the center group here. If in destabilizing, there's opportunities for a capture or two. But now we can really see the power, I think, of these 4 stones in this group here, in that black is able to leverage them very strongly to constantly cut white off. And so white is never able to build a large single framework here, or large on a small scale, to build a good framework here, and is constantly being cut off and is juggling more and more and more smaller groups. So there's another move here with L9 where I think I would change it slightly. To me, it looks like Xmo is still looking at this center group of black stones here to try and capture. It's ambitious. I think the clock is against Xmo and trying to make it work, but I think it's also a really cool play because you need something big like this to enable those stones to live. Instead, though, what I might recommend is actually a play at K9. So if we look for a second, now that this stone was strengthened, I think this N6 play was really smart by Xmo to strengthen this group. You have a lot of groups that are weak but are not immediately under threat. So instead, if we're most concerned about reducing liberties, we want to threaten to connect, I think is a big thing. I think by threatening to connect back, we're going to encourage black to go ahead and take. And then we have some options, I think. The first, for example, is you could go to threaten to close, and then if black, oh, that was the reason. There was a slightly different reading here. I think that you want to play O10 because you are worried that black is going to try to take, which so now black cannot play N11 because white will simply take. So black is more likely to go ahead and squash here, in which case you can fill in. And now you're looking at a match that comes down to just a couple liberties, and potentially you may need to utilize other threats to kind of give yourself some extra time. But it's still an upwards battle at the moment. So this white group has 4 liberties here. And if we switch it, if I can find that, we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 liberties in this group. So one thing to note about this, though, that I think gives white some leverage is this space right here. So if black simply chooses to go ahead and try and go for the kill, I think this move gives us a move here at J10 would give us a lot of leverage, because suddenly we can utilize the fact that we are working with a couple of different groups here to threaten these stones and reduce black's liberties much quicker. Another way, though, is assuming that black goes to close. We can then go ahead and close ourselves. And now we're looking at only 3 liberties against the 4. So I think that there's the mindset of Xmo was a good one, and the approach to utilize and try to manage a bunch of weak groups was smart. It's just that in this particular setup, by going for the direct play to quash down here, we lose out on a move or two that we really do need that end up being crucial for the larger picture. And I think this is a good example of what the potential for what we could have gotten and what we ended up getting, and the difference not just in immediate stones but in the overall board. So in the situation where we do that throw in, we're looking at trying to capture, we're looking at trying to save the entire group, right? So then this group here, this side here, Our goal is to save all of these. If that is possible and if we can pull that off, then that means we suddenly have a large group in the center that one is alive, sure, absolutely is important, but also can then be leveraged to push further. So even though I keep talking about, well, it's a little slow, the attacks are coming from existing groups, in this particular instance, if you're able to save this group, you're now in the middle of Black's setup, and it's a great position to keep pushing forward, to bulldoze forward, because you have safety to work from and you're inside the territory. Conversely, what we end up with here is we do end up with 4 stones that we capture, and I think that was a nice job by Xmo to get those 4 stones and make that group safe. However, compared to what we were shooting for, we end up drawing that, we end up continuing to further refine that beginning battle line. And we put our stones in a situation where they're now, these stones are looking to die. These look kind of these look very dicey. And we then have no opening into Black's territory at the moment. Whereas that's what we were hoping to get earlier. So I think the sequencing was a little bit off in this case. What Xmo was trying to do, the intent was absolutely there. And again, we see Xmo still, if the right hand side is looking dicey, how do we work with the left hand side instead because Xmo absolutely recognizes that the territory as it stands is too big for Black, and something needs to happen. I think it's just with the existing Black stones, Black can reinforce so easily. Xmo is doing a nice job of trying to create some space and then work from it, but it's just a very small space to work from, and it's constantly working against them and making that job much harder. We see here, Xmo does a nice job of noticing the 3-3 with R17. I think that it would have been more impactful much earlier in the game, before everything else, before all of this in the center had gotten established, because it would have destabilized some of this giant structure Black was trying to build. At this point, it's still absolutely a good move to try to get those points, to try to carve away the corner, but it's a little less impactful, I think, in terms of what you can use to threaten, because so much of this side, I think, is already in the center here, is already settled. So we see this play out. Another thing too is we see that Xmo tries to go in for the C17 point, the 3-3 point on the left hand side, but Black has that C14 stone in its knight configuration that does a lot more to clamp down on the possibilities and makes it so that it's harder to get the same result. I think another thing in terms of sequencing in my mind, I might have instead pushed down first, because you can still pull back, and if Black chooses, I might pull back then. The thing that results that makes me want to look for a better result is that White plays at D18 first to try to go ahead and I think get themselves out. They don't want to push into the C14 stone, which makes sense, but they have to pull back to the C18, and Black can just clamp down on that very hard in a way that removes further possibilities from White. So I would look to maybe try it either, in this case, when I said sequencing, I meant perhaps trying to push forward first before pulling back to give yourself a little extra leverage, or if Black goes ahead and hunters, instead trying to go back further as well and utilize the corner a little bit more, but with the addition of the C16 stone and a little bit more room to work with. It's just so cramped as soon as C16 goes down by Ruler, or by Newbie 101, as the OGS name goes. I think that Ruler also does a really nice job here of noticing exactly how they can take down this group here. And so the result then is that because of the very limited space Xmo ends up with in this left-hand corner, black is able to kill. I still think it was a great idea for Xmo to be looking in that corner, even if it would have been more ideal to utilize that corner earlier in the game, noticing that that's a place that they may be able to get a foothold is great and is important to keep in mind when you're looking for possibilities. Once other small things, we're getting towards the very end of the game. So this D9 stone here does solidify the base and does try to solidify this larger group here. Though again, this is under this section here is under threat by this large group of black stones and the ability to connect back. But you're still trying to at least strengthen the territory that you can get. The potential issue that I see is that black didn't end up doing this, but black could have gone for a play at b6, which is why I think that rather than play at d9 for a relatively small wall game by like a point, I would probably play at a7 or I would play at b4. So we'll look at those in a second. So alternatives would be a7 or b4 here instead of the d9 play. And the reason is that if we look at what black can do, if black chooses to clamp right here with b6, we then run into two issues. So black is threatening to connect under and then continue a run with an a7 play. Black is also threatening to try to destabilize the base further with a b4 play right here. And so there are two different ways in which black can connect and further reduce the position of white. And so because of that, I think it's more beneficial to go ahead and try and cut one of those off, again, with that simply playing down at a7 or playing at b4. b4 has the benefit of encouraging black to strengthen their position with a response at b3, whereas your a7 play is a play that is a go-to play that kind of it seeds initiative. You're not asking, you are doing it because the threat is big relative to the position, but black isn't forced to respond. There's nothing about that positioning that asks or requires black to respond to that, in which case black then gets to turn around and play wherever they want to. So I think because of that, the playing at b4 is probably a little bit stronger in trying to get an initiative. There's possibilities too in playing b3. I'd need to read a little bit more on what that does, because you're putting heavier pressure, but you're also leaving a cutting point open, and you're still technically leaving that b6 stone as a possibility for black at the moment if you start with b3. So reading the sequence out to double check that you're not being too aggressive, it would be important. And from there's just some cleanup here. And there's definitely some things here where I think that it's important to double check and make sure. So anytime you leave a cutting point, for example, so we're looking at b4 that becomes that does get exploited, before you move on to another location, before you move on to the g5 play that Xmo does, it's important to double check and make sure that you don't need to be worried. So trying to read at least a couple moves out can really help, because in this case, although Xmo is trying to get trying to get points here, and this absolutely makes sense as a move, black is then going to take advantage of that and is going to take away more of the corner from you. So I think some of that could have been avoided by simply closing that off a little quicker. sort of get to the end. And the end result in game one, round one, game one, between Newbie 101, also known as Just Your Eventual Ruler or Ruler, and Xmo or Xmo5, was that Black or Newbie 101 wins by 96.5 points. I think in closing, if we look back at this game, I think there's a lot of really interesting takeaways from this. The biggest one is just the power of that the strength of your early game really does set you up for an easier or a harder game. It doesn't mean, especially at these stages that we're playing at, it doesn't mean that it's unwinnable, right? Because we're all still going to make mistakes. We're not pros who can, read dozens and dozens of moves out that are less likely to make a mistake if a disadvantage occurs. There is more volatility in these games, and I think as long as you feel like there's a shot, you should still continue to play it out and do your best to practice your reading, figure out how you can practice also playing from behind. And so in this game, I think that Xmo, when they were behind, definitely had the right approach, that you need to go ahead and be the aggressor, and you need to try to find ways into this setup to prevent Black from simply taking what it wants to, because what it wants is too big and needs to be stopped. But I think the big difference was just the ways in which White tried to push in this game were a bit too slow, and so the alternatives would be diving in behind enemy lines early in the game when much of the board is still open, or more of the board is still open, and or when diving in from the front instead, really accepting that the stones that you're probably going to be working with, the groups that you're going to have, are going to be weak, and you're going to be playing a very tightrope. If you want to approach from the front, you've got to. It seems in this case you're really going to have to be doing a lot of fighting, and you aren't going to have the luxury of working with one or two groups that are pretty strong and that can just kind of like keep pushing their way in. You're probably going to do what Xmo did, which is begin to juggle a number of groups to see if you can get them to all come together. You can read a way for them to all come together and turn it around, and utilize the chaos on the board to get that foothold that you're looking for to eventually go ahead and break open Black, or at minimum keep yourself alive and vastly reduce the territory that they have. So that was round one, game one, between Ruler as Black and Xmo as White. I think it was a really interesting game, and we'll go ahead and look at game two in a little bit. If you're a fan of chess, Wargroove, turn-based games in general, obviously this is part of the Take Your Turn tournament that's being hosted by Groove of War. You can see all of the Wargroove and chess. I wrote for myself cheese. I must be hungry. The Wargroove and chess replays from the tournament are all going to be available on that Groove of War channel. And of course, the primary focus has been Wargroove. So if you're looking for high-level content, you're looking for tips and tricks to pick up, they have a lot of great resources there as they look at a number of high-level games. So aside from that, thank you for watching, and look forward to the next game.